I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Where we're at right now is not where we aspired to be in the beginning or where we aspire to be right now. Those are the words of Kyle Dubas from the Pittsburgh Penguins, president of hockey operations / general manager, as he addressed the media with regards to his hockey club. They are a handful of points outside of the wild card picture. We had a whole discussion earlier this week about Jake Guentzel and as it pertains to Sidney Crosby's future, which I still think he's not leaving, but worthwhile if you want to check out that discussion on Monday's episode. But so much to go through with this team as it appears that they might be looking to sell off everyone that's not a part of their core. CJ, what did you make of Kyle Dubas's press conference yesterday and the future of the Pittsburgh Penguins as it pertains to this season?
Well, the quote you just read is a lot of words to be saying that this is a disappointment. I mean, there's no other way to look at this year in Pittsburgh. Kyle Dubas takes over that team, pretty significant overhaul on the fringes of the roster around obviously those core players. But between trades, free agent signings, obviously the big Erik Karlsson deal, extended Tristan Jarry. I mean, a lot of big decisions were made by Kyle Dubas in a short amount of time. And it's just not gotten any more out of this team than what they had last year when they, played down to the last week of the regular season, last days of the regular season before missing the playoffs ultimately. And, they're in a worse position as we're recording this right now. I mean, they're 8 points out of a playoff spot in the wild card, 10 points out of third in the Metropolitan Division. And in fact, they're closer really to being a team that could be drafting in the top 10 than one that we should be looking at as a playoff team. And that's on the back of the season Sidney Crosby's having. In addition to that, I think it could be worse if he had aged the way normal humans age, even just from this year to last year. And so, yeah, it's a difficult spot. I think that Kyle Dubas wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't looking to make some trades, because he's got to free up the ability to have a big summer this year. I'll say this. I'm certainly of the opinion that a full rebuild doesn't make sense. I think that when you have those players and they want to be there and they want to try to retire as Penguins, it's kind of your duty as the organization to try to be as competitive as long as you can. And the full teardown rebuilds, they don't go too well, generally speaking. So, there should be urgency in Pittsburgh, but I don't think it should be urgency to try to squeeze into the playoffs now. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen. The good news, I suppose, is there's 2 more weeks before the deadline. So Kyle Dubas will get a little bit more information in terms of exactly where his team is at leading into March 8th. But ultimately, I think we're going to be talking about them trading a player or 2 or more out of town versus, trying to load up for a push to the playoffs.
You put up a trade board earlier today. How many more Pittsburgh Penguins will be on that list when you update it the next time around?
We'll see what the intel is. I mean, you've got Jake Guentzel pretty high up on that list for obvious reasons. We've talked about his situation a lot, but one thing Kyle Dubas said in his press conference on Wednesday was we have a lot of players signed to long contracts in their 30s. And the unspoken part of that is, do they want to add another one? As good as Jake Guentzel is, this is not a comment on him or whether he's worth investing in. I think it's more about, does he fit where that team is at? And it's hard for me to conclude that he does. Keep in mind that the Penguins traded away a first-round pick in that Karlsson deal. The surest way to get one back, I would presume, at least with the sort of moves that they're willing to consider, would be trading Jake Guentzel at the deadline. You have a player like Riley Smith, who's got 1 more year on his deal. I think that, he just hasn't been a fit. That was one of the meant to be a more impactful offseason trade that Kyle Dubas pulled off at the draft and, hasn't worked for a variety of reasons. So you got him on the board. I think Ryan Graves is someone they'd look at moving into free agent signing that hasn't worked out, but it's a lot of term and money there. Probably not a deal that you see executed by March 8th, but there could be other depth types of trades too. I think, as I mentioned, the real key here is opening up a little bit of space, opening up the ability to make off-season moves, because they just can't be a team that runs it back the same way. You know what I mean? I think that they have to be doing absolutely everything they can to squeeze what they can out of the roster. And then if we get to a point where you say, okay, it's just not going to happen in Pittsburgh, then we're talking about the retool /rebuild.
So what about Erik Karlsson? Do you put him in that core group of untouchables, or just is his contract just a little bit too difficult to move? How do you see it?
For the deadline, I would be stunned. I mean, San Jose was highly motivated to move him at last year's deadline, and it didn't work. Now, they ultimately ended up retaining a bit of salary. And keep in mind, if Pittsburgh gets to a point in the offseason where they think that moving on from Erik Karlsson makes sense, I mean, they can retain more. And all of a sudden, you're no longer trading a $12 million player. It can become, something a little bit more palatable and probably more in line with where Erik Karlsson is at this stage of his career. But, with him having a no move clause and the money, the financial aspect of that deal, I don't think that that's one you're going to pull off inside a 2-week window. But I think everything will have to be on the table this offseason, especially barring some magnificent, miraculous finish where they do get in the playoffs. I mean, then you're at 2 years in a row without the playoffs. You're facing a summer where you're going to be looking to get Sidney Crosby signed to his extension July 1st. And so, I think Pittsburgh should be one of the most active teams in the next 6 months of activity, or longer, into the summertime. And, that some of that work can get done here by March 8th. And so, Kyle didn't come out and say all this stuff. I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but I think that he was kind of implying that this is where it's going. It was quite clear he's not going to be a buyer. He's not, looking to unload more first round picks. This isn't necessarily there's not one or two moves out there that are going to drastically change anything. I think that it's more of, a good hard look at the roster entering next year. And I would think they'll be one of the teams we're talking a lot about the summer in terms of loading up and making some bold plays.
Kind of wild that Kyle Dubas goes from one situation in Toronto where he's doing everything he can to satisfy and appease and build up a core four, essentially, to a core three or maybe a core four, depending on how you look at it in Pittsburgh. It's just kind of a weird, funny situation for Kyle Dubas and what he's ended up in. And I don't envy the work that he has to do to put himself, to try to put the Pittsburgh Penguins over the top anyway. I don't envy him in that position.
It's a hard job to look good in, I feel like. And look, he got a 7-year contract, which is far more security than most people do. He was smart. I think he was realistic. That the term of that deal shows that both he and Fenway Sports Group, the team, the entity that owns the team, were realistic about the job ahead. Like I think that they understood it's possible the best days of the team are in the past, but you're trying to do what you can now, and then there's going to have to be some kind of retool on the fly. And I think if we look ahead, say 3 years, I think ideally, if you start with that sort of frame of reference in terms of time, if you're Kyle Dubas, you want to build this team up where it has a chance to be rebounding while Sidney Crosby's still part of it, right? I mean, it might not be possible. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, as I know you love when I say that, Julian, but I think that that's got to be the goal, as much as it is to clearly get them back to the playoffs. I mean, they haven't put up the white flag yet on this year's playoffs, but I'm thinking it's going to be difficult. But as much as it in short term to have success, I think you want to try to be integrating young players onto that roster at a time when Crosby can still be putting a stamp on a team, can be part of what they're doing, and maybe ultimately somehow, some way, be chasing the Stanley Cup. I mean, that seems like a far off goal, just because it generally takes teams a little while to build and build and build. But I think that has to be the goal in the front office, and that should inform what the decisions they make now, when it comes to this deadline.
Pittsburgh Penguins need a first-round pick, man. They only have a second, a fourth, a sixth, and 2 sevenths in this summer's upcoming draft. We mentioned that first-round pick, gone to San Jose as part of that Erik Karlsson trade. If they want to eventually kind of do this retool on the fly thing here, they need some kind of first-round pick. Probably Jake Gensel's the player to get that pick, but I don't think if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, you could accept just entering a draft without a first-round pick.
No, and look, I think that they keep that pick if it ends up in the top 10, which still not impossible. Yes. If the bottom falls out, they're kind of they're in a window where they could pick top 10. So they might end up picking this year in the top 10. But I'm with you. I think that they, as an organization, I'm not going to be critical of the moves made in the past. I mean, they didn't all work out, but when you've got 3 Stanley Cup banners with the core of this team, I think the end justifies the means there, that all the picks and deals they've made in past deadlines. Like I don't have any problem with that, but they got to start. You're right. They have to start introducing younger players to that lineup, and they grafted a lot of older guys on there, right? I mean, they got Lars Ellers and even Riley Smith, where he's at in his career. Carlson's in his 30s. I mean, they Noel Achari they signed. Like they really they have a lot of uh, you know gray-haired members of that team. So I do think I do think that Kyle recognizes that transition has to start, and probably start a little bit next season.
Any other big takeaways from that press conference before we move on to the rest of the trade tree? Not trade tree, sorry. I was thinking of Steve Taggle's trade trees. Before we move on to the rest of the trade picture as it is with the rest of the NHL.
No, I just, he did also, Kyle Dubas back Mike Sullivan again, which he's been want to do consistently. And I think this is such a unique situation because Mike Sullivan, I think widely still considered one of the better coaches in the league. Probably going to get some consideration to coach at the Olympics for Team USA. But is he signing up for this? And you start to feel the same way, but we're not going to open the door on the Crosby discussions and all that again. But it's a big job when you have those franchise legends and people that have a big contract like Sullivan and have had so much success. Just how you handle that while you sort of transition. I mean, it's not going to be a traditional rebuild. I'll put it that way. And I think that's probably what excites Kyle Dubas, quite honestly, is that he's going to get a chance to do something in a way that maybe it doesn't always happen, just the way it all lines up with when he was hired and where the team's at and who the individuals are involved there. But, I think they're going to be a fascinating team to watch because they can't sit still. There's just no justification for, rolling it back with the same thing. They have to try something new.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Liquid IV. Whether you're staying up late, yelling at the TV with your friends, watching the game, or just hanging out, going to a bar or establishment of your choice that you happen to enjoy frequenting on a Saturday night, you have to be prepared for that hydration Monday. We all know how Sundays can get, but that Monday when you're back at it at work, you need something to get you going, and Liquid IV can help you out with that. Whether you're taking in the white peach flavor, the grape flavor, lemon lime, they have a whole assortment of flavors at your disposal, and they keep you hydrated. All you need is one stick, literally just something that looks like this, 16 ounces of water. It's better than water alone when it comes to hydration. 3 times the electrolytes over the leading sports drink, no artificial sweeteners, 8 vitamins and minerals, and non-GMO and free from gluten, dairy, and soy. It's perfect. It's great. Weekends are for going wild. Have a game plan for Monday with Liquid IV. Grab your Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier sugar-free in bulk nationwide at Costco or get 20% off your first order when you go to liquidiv.com and use code Johnston at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Superior Hydration today using promo code Johnston at liquidiv.com.
All right. Speaking of teams on the verge of non-traditional rebuilds, it's time to talk about the Calgary Flames again. I hear producer Nick groaning in my ear at the fact that we have to mention the Calgary Flames again. But they have the most enticing assets ahead of the NHL trade deadline in March. Earlier this week, you talked about and reported on Noah Hanifin likely to leave the Calgary Flames ahead of the deadline. The Tampa Bay Lightning as a team interested in Noah Hanifin, which I have questions about with regards to what assets they might have available. I'm not going to diss their prospect base, but in terms of their draft picks, I'm not sure if I have questions about whether or not they have a package that could appeal to the Calgary Flames. They want younger players, they want high draft picks. I wonder if the Lightning are able to afford that price point. And I think it could start a good discussion about what the asking prices could be for a Noah Hanifin, and even for Chris Tanev. We can lump him in this conversation as well, as it appears he'll also be gone by the trade deadline. But Tampa Bay's interest in Noah Hanifin, can you talk a little bit more about it?
Well, it makes a lot of sense, right? Mikhail Sergachev, I don't know if you saw, he posted on his Instagram this week. I mean, he's just starting to walk again after the surgery he had for the broken bones that got reset in his leg. It doesn't look, and the team has not yet provided a firm timeline on his return, but I think it's fair to assume we're not seeing him again before the playoffs at the absolute earliest, which means they have his cap room to make a big deal. I think their blue line this year has been, they've patched it together. They've used a lot of, sort of off the radar players. And look, Tampa's in a playoff spot. They're getting by. but I think it's a natural place for us to look for the Lightning to upgrade. And this just fits Julian Brisebois, man. I mean, nobody has traded more first round picks than him in the last number of years. No one has made more bold moves. And, that's not to say it's going to happen, but when you ask, what do they have that might appeal to Calgary? I mean, you also hinted at it off the top. The Flames aren't looking to fall to the bottom of the standings, even though they're trading away some impactful players. And so what Tampa has is it has a 2026 first round pick, which might be more appealing than you think. I mean, if you're making a bet, you would lose a lot of bets if you had been betting against the Tampa Bay Lightning declining at some point. But I think it's fair to assume a couple years down the road, maybe they're not still the same quality of Stanley Cup contender they are today. And so maybe holding one of their draft picks in the future is actually, it's going to take a long time before you can use that. It's also an asset. If you hold a first rounder out that long, you can look to trade yourself again in a subsequent deal. So the Lightning do have a 2026 first round pick, and they've got players. And I haven't heard any specific names, so I'm not going to, go on the roster and, phantom say this guy's going to Calgary. But, I think one of the underplayed parts of the Lindholm trade is they did get Kuzmenko back. And so, that's a player who's in their lineup now, who scored some goals, signed through next season, is clearly an NHL player. You know what I mean? Like, you're not just taking Elias Lindholm away and trusting a 22-year-old with the job, or, it's not exact same positional or the same type of player you get back in Kuzmenko, but you at least get another NHL body that's in your lineup. And so, I wonder if there is a way for this to work. And the feeling around Hanifin at this point in time is that, when he signs his next deal, it's likely to be in the US. So maybe this is a sign and trade too. That maybe there's a component of this where they're committing to him longer term. And, wouldn't that be interesting, given that, you've got Victor Hedman there, you've got Sergachev in your long-term plan, signed long-term, even though he's injured this year. The Lightning are bold. I'll say that. And so they're not the only team with interest, but the fact that they have interest always catches your eye, because they tend to really sharply identify the players they want and go aggressively after them. I mean, you think back to Tanner Jeannot last year, 5 draft picks they traded to Nashville for that player. People scoffed when they got Barclay Goodrow for a first-round pick. What are they thinking? And Goodrow, got his name inscribed on the cup in the twice in the 2 years he was there. Blake Coleman, the same thing. It's a savvy and aggressive front office, and whenever you start to hear Tampa being connected to a player, you got to take it seriously.
Absolutely. But with teams like Dallas out there, which I feel they're a little bit of a sleeping giant in terms of the interest that they could have in a Hanifin or any player available. They have draft picks. They have young players that they could offload. If I'm Craig Conroy, why not go for a team that has a first or is willing to offload a pick, not a pick, but a prospect like a Maverick Bourque, who's doing really well at the American Hockey League level. Even the Bruins, who don't have a first round pick, depending on what could be made available through that side, that's another avenue, right? I will never doubt the savviness and the acumen of a Julian Brisebois, but I just wonder if their trade packages could be as competitive as some of the other rumored teams that are out there for Noah Hanifin or even a Chris Tanev.
Well, here's something else I'll put on your radar. All first round picks are not created equal. And,
no.
I've been hearing in my conversations that I've had in the last week or so here more and more that a lot of teams are down on this first round after a certain point, be it 12 or 15. But, when we're talking about the contending teams trading their first round picks, you have to assume those picks are somewhere between 20 and 32 for the most part for this coming draft. I mean, and so as much as if you're in Calgary shoes and you're selling, or Philadelphia, or some of these other teams that I think are going to have some attractive pieces to sell, you may not want the 2024 first, or you may not value it as high as well. And so it's just something else to put on your radar. I mean, you're right. Dallas is a team that has a first rounder in 2024. I think that they will move it for some kind of addition at the deadline. They are prioritizing their blue line. So Hanifin, you're not just connecting dots that don't make sense with that. And I guess in the front offices, you have to weigh that sort of the unknown. I mean, we don't know the 2026 draft. What's that going to look like? I mean, that's going to be kids born in 2009, 2008. I mean,
Jesus.
We're talking about kids that are 15 right now, though, right? I mean, it's hard to, I'm sure that there's there's prospect gurus out there that'll tell you there's some great 15-year-old, the next one coming. But I mean, it doesn't always quite work out as planned. And so that'll be a factor here. And, Calgary's interesting because they already got the Lindholm first. I think there's a world where they get a first for Tanev, a second at minimum, I would think. You get another first for Hanifin. If they trade Markstrom, there could be another first. I mean, they could end up with quite a few first-round picks. I mean, it's something we've seen Arizona manage to do in recent years here. A couple other teams have, Montreal has stockpiled, more than just the typical number of first-round picks. But it's smart to do for Calgary as well because they've still got one going out the door, right? We're not even going to get into that those trade clauses. It melts my brain when I try to figure out how the Sean Monahan.
It melts my brain and the NHL execs too. Like I know this for a fact that there are NHL execs around the league who look at that and they're like, "What is going on?"
They probably can't wait till the trade conditions are satisfied on that one, so it's just off the books. So no one has to worry about it again. But if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, there's a lot of conditions tied to the first round pick. Calgary will send to Montreal. That was forced sending Sean Monahan there originally, but it's all tied in with the first round pick with Florida and the Matthew Tkachuk trade. Anyway, let's not. This pod will go right off the rails if we try to dig into that and make it make any sense because it's beyond.
That's fair, but there is one thing I'd like to sort of mention. We don't have to go in on that trade. I would think that Craig Conroy probably wants a first round pick in 2025 to offset the one that he could lose. I think, right. And I think if Chris Tanev is not going to get you a first round pick this year, what's wrong with getting a 2025 first round pick for him?
Nothing. I mean, this is these are valuable assets. Something else I reported this week, Julian, but I found it interesting is that Arizona, which if you look at the next number of drafts, they have so many picks, 20 picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 drafts total. Plus they've been making a ton in these last couple of years. They're looking to sell players now and they're looking for more picks. They view the picks, not just for the players that they might become, because obviously I don't think that they could, most teams, I mean, the way the rules work, you can only have 50 players under contract. I mean, there is actually a critical mass where it's not beneficial to have that many prospects. It's probably there's likely challenges that I can't even conceive of in terms of just making sure they develop properly, having the resources to interface with them, all those sorts of things. But the Coyotes still want more picks, and so I think if you're in Calgary's position, even if you're not trying to go to the bottom of the league, even if you are bringing players back, accumulating those picks are valuable, and that's why that they've been their players have been at the top of the trade board every single time. This is the 5th one we've done. I don't think there's been a non-Calgary Flame there. It was Lindholm at a certain point in time. It's been Tanev. It's now Hanifin. There's maybe a case to be made that it could be Markstrom. The Flames, this is a unique window, and obviously getting it right is important. And, nailing the picks and the development aspect will be important for years to come. But they're really the only declared seller at this deadline that has, as of this moment, that has a lot to sell. I mean, I think Pittsburgh is kind of a half declared seller, and Gensel's pretty enticing. But a lot of Anaheim's got Adam Henrique and Sam Carrick who's on the board, and Ilya Lyubushkin who's on the board. John Gibson is on the board, although I think it's going to be tough to move that contract. San Jose's got Duclair and others, but really Calgary is stirring the drink here, and let's hope they got some action for us soon. It's actually been a pretty quiet trade period, since the All-Star break.
I'm anticipating an emergency podcast at some point where we're talking about a trade between Noah Hanifin and insert team here, and or Chris Tanev and insert this team here. I'm ready for it. The laptop's ready. The mic is ready. I'll be ready whenever that has to happen.
What's interesting, and we'll move on from this because I know we beat Calgary around every episode, but the Flames, from my understanding, the Flames have been pretty aggressive, even till very recently, to try to sign Hanifin. They're really trying to hold on to the player. There could be a number, or there could be a contract structure or something they can put in front of them that changes things. But they haven't. It's not like they do want to just sell everything. They've put a pretty strong effort forward to keep them, and I just don't think they're going to be able to do it.
And I'll say this, Noah Hanifin, at least what's been conveyed to me, has nothing against the city of Calgary. He likes the city of Calgary. It's just, I think his desire ultimately to play in the States just might be bigger than playing in Calgary. And if they're not going to be in a position where they're going to be competitive, maybe now's the time to make that move.
It's both, right? I mean, it's nothing about the city. It's players want to play where they can win, especially players who haven't had a chance to win.
Absolutely.
And, Hanifin's been in the league a fairly long time now and hasn't really had a true chance to win a cup. I mean, the Flames of a couple of years ago had a really good team. They just lost early in the playoffs. But, I think you get to this point, and that's why, Tampa, put it this way. If I had a no trade clause, I would waive for Tampa. Like, Tampa is like the one place in the league, even as a journalist, man, I would go live there. And I don't say that about many places. Like, honestly, I love when I travel around the league. I can find redeeming aspects or things I like about every place. But there's it's a very small number of places I can look at. And I'm like, I would live there. Tampa is one of the very few places.
CJ, give us the teams on your no trade clause.
What do you mean? Like the ones I won't
like
go
cities,
to?
Like NHL cities, you would not waive your no trade clause. Like you are stapled to Toronto for however long you're signed for, and the opportunity to be traded, quote unquote, happens. Give me some NHL cities you would not waive your no trade clause for.
Well, I'm going to do what the majority of players do. I'm going to have Canada on there, and I'm going to have California on there.
So, like, Montreal comes up, you're not moving to Montreal? What is this?
Well, it might, but here's the thing. Most players, this is the truth about the trade clauses, especially the ones that don't cover the whole league. Most of them are like Canada and California because of the tax situation, and players just don't want to be traded there against their will. You can then, in an individualized case, the team can come to you and be like, hey, look, CJ, that the Habs really want you. And then, then I have a decision to make. Something against those cities, but, it's a short career.
But like New Jersey hits you up. You're like, all right, I'm going to go work in New Jersey.
New Jersey's a good spot.
That was the least convincing support for New Jersey I've ever heard in my life.
Dude, it's beside Manhattan.
I mean,
it is. And I don't know. I actually haven't been to a lot of the suburbs there, but I know there's like nice suburbs where the players live. And I think it's a good place to live and play. I think, look at Timo Meier went there and stayed. I'm just saying, Timo Meier last year could have been the most attractive free agent had he not signed there. I mean, he went there and stayed. And I still think, it's been a weird year for the Devils, the injuries, everything that's gone on. But I still think that's a team that's going to be good for years to come too. So like that would be part of it. You want to be somewhere where you can have professional and personal success. And I would not block my move to New Jersey. Put it that way.
Okay. All right. You heard it here first,
I'm not
everybody.
standing for this Devils slander. I've been in on the Devils for a couple of years now.
Adam Wild's going to like that. As you know, he is a big New Jersey Devils fan. Anyone else on your NHL trade board, which you can read at The Athletic, that we should be looking out for? Sean Walker comes to mind, but I'm sure there are other names you want us to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, Walker's an interesting case. I think he's a player that the Flyers want to get a first-round pick for. And, I actually had a chance to chat with him last week when they were through Toronto. And, he's kind of embracing this, I think, is the best way to put it. Like not just our trade board, but just having his name in the rumors so prominently. He and the Flyers have had discussions on an extension. And, here recently again as well. And, I think ultimately it's still more likely than not he's traded because, what they can get for him is too appealing. And what he can get potentially as a free agent is pretty appealing. Like for him to give up the chance to become a UFA as a right shot defenseman, one who's having a good year, one who, if traded from Philadelphia, presumably is going to a team that's going to play in the playoffs where obviously he can show his stuff and put himself in the best spot entering July 1st. I think don't be surprised when he gets a first round pick. And I do think he'll be dealt. He could return to Philadelphia too. That's the other thing. Like I know he and the Flyers have both really appreciated and liked each other. Like I think it's been a good relationship. Walker mentioned he didn't really know what to expect when he got there. He gets traded last summer. He just moved into a new house actually in California. So that was, from a personal standpoint, wasn't ideal. But he knew he'd be in the trade rumors this year, and it's worked out great. Look, there's not a lot of new names on there. I mean, maybe if we talked about Pavel Buchnevich much, he's kind of jumped up the board just because I think, the fact he's signed one more year, he's, having a productive season in St. Louis, It's not a foregone conclusion. They don't have to move him. In fact, as we're recording this, St. Louis is actually in a wild card spot. But we've seen Doug Armstrong do this before. Like, I think he's pretty realistic about asset management, and he's open to a lot of things. I'm told the price on him would have to be bigger than what, Lindholm got the Flames. So obviously someone would have to step up to make that a deal. But contending teams are looking at Buchnevich because he's, someone I think that could fit in the top 6 on really good teams. And some teams might see it as a positive that he signed next year as well. You're trading for two runs with him, not just one. Yeah, I don't know if there's any names in particular.
That's interesting. Can we delve in on that a little bit more? So Doug Armstrong would want more than what the Flames got for Elias Lindholm. Do I have that right?
You have that right, but I mean, you're talking about a player with term on his deal. Like Lindholm was a pure rental, right? That's
Yes.
the other side of this. It's not to say one player is better than the other. It's that you're getting more value back if you're guaranteed to have Buchnevich next year on your roster. At least that would be the argument that would be made in that trade conversation. For Vancouver, it's very much up in the air whether Lindholm will stay. I mean, I think he's keeping an open mind about it, but he's also not dumb. Much like I said with Sean Walker, he recognizes when we start doing the free agent board, his name's going to be right back at the top, and he's got a chance to go to July 1st and hear what every team in the league has to say, and potentially have a little bit of a bidding war for himself and maximize his earning potential. So, Vancouver did give up that first, gave up a couple prospects, gave up Kuzmenko, which in their case was someone they needed to get off the roster in terms of making all the money work. And, he'd been a healthy scratch this season there. But yeah, I think for St. Louis to act, it's going to have to be something big, but I wouldn't rule it out just because, and I say this with respect, there's not, look at the other forwards available. I mean, only one team is going to trade for Adam Henrique. Only one team gets Jake Gensel. There's probably more teams than those two that are looking to bolster their forward group. And, let's see how it plays out. The St. Louis Blues have been winning a lot too. So that could, that could be a fly in the ointment here. Whereas we're trading players off their roster, they might be firmly in a playoff spot on March 4th. And then all of a sudden those plans don't pan out.
Speaking of forwards, what about Vladimir Tarasenko and his situation? We know about the changing of agents. What is it? 3 in the last 4 years? So the 4th time in the last 3 years he's had to change agents recently. What about his situation, and which teams could be interested?
I think Edmonton has looked there. I mean, look, Edmonton's looked at every forward. I will say with certainty that the Oilers are going to make a trade for a forward between now and the deadline. I can't tell you which one it's going to be, but I think they're a team that's looked at Buchnevich. I think they're a team that's looked at Tarasenko, Gensel, Henrique. I think that they're really surveying the market at that position to see what makes the most sense, both in terms of acquisition costs and for their lineup. Tarasenko, from what I've heard from scouts, is played hard this season. That I think it's fair to say it wasn't his first choice to end up in Ottawa on a 1-year contract at the end of the summer, kind of the way it went. But even on a team that's underperformed, he can still put the puck in the net. He's still built like a tank. I think built in a physical way that he can withstand. What the playoffs become, where the battle for ice is far more important in terms of producing offense. He's got some Stanley Cup pedigree. He went for a 1st-round pick, remember, last year when St. Louis traded him to the Rangers at the deadline. I don't know that Ottawa is going to get it first for him this time around. It's just an extra year on. Maybe some of the perceived value goes down in the marketplace. But, I'd certainly expect him to be moved by the deadline. I think the Senators are a team that are looking to, sounds like they're looking at bigger trades. Like, they're not just looking at trading away their UFAs. I don't know that they've found the traction they need on those kind of deals just yet. But I think with a new ownership and management group in place, obviously new coaching staff and probably a new head coach to come, Jacques Martin's there on an interim basis, that they're looking at some larger scale moves. But, among the most obvious, decisions they have is just finding a landing spot for Tarasenko. And I don't think they're going to have any trouble doing so.
CJ, do you have any other trade tidbits, trade nuggets, trade talk, trade discussion, anything to do with the trade that you'd like to get off your chest now before we move on?
No, just that I'm hearing rumors that you're going to be traded to agent provocateur, but at this point it's just rumblings. So nothing I can confirm at this hour, but sources are saying there have been discussions.
Oh boy. Oh my god. Oh my god. Now I feel exactly how players feel. They don't want to see themselves in the rumors. They don't want to see themselves leave. Good
Julian in a
lord.
third round pick for Adam Wild.
Oh my god. No. Anyway,
Hey, you get
uh
the extra pick because you're younger. You got more upside than Adam. So
I, I don't know if people want to listen to Agent Provocateur with me and Alan Walsh. I don't know. I don't know.
we should do like a wacko episode, right? Where you just do one.
Yeah. Everyone just like switches. My dream is still to guest host the Steve Dangle podcast. It will happen one day. But it would be I would say like my dream, but it's something I would very much love to do. Like just put me on like a kids table episode whenever like Adam is sick or something. I would love to just be a part of that.
You're one phone call away from that happening. Like that is so going to happen at some point. I don't know what circumstances will necessitate it, but I mean you're next on the speed dial.
Okay. So we're done with trade talk for now. Check out CJ's trade board up on the Athletic website. I want to talk about some of the places you've been recently. Well, maybe more just one location. We saw your cameo appearance on TSN with John Liu as part of the Winnipeg Jets broadcast. You were in Winnipeg a couple days ago. Want to talk about your excursion and who you might have been talking to in the great city of Winnipeg?
Yeah, it was like a weirdo universe where I'm appearing on the Jets regional broadcast with John from the press box. It was pretty cool though.
Love John.
Love John as well. I've known him a long time. I when I first came up, he was actually the Toronto-based TSN reporter. Then had a long stint, obviously, in Montreal, and has since moved back to his hometown of Winnipeg here the last couple of years. Yeah, I was in Winnipeg. I'm working on a story for The Athletic about some of the things that have gone on there. I know we've hit on it early in the season with the attendance troubles that the Jets have had, and had an opportunity actually to sit down with the chairman of the team, Mark Chipman, for I think what I would deem was a very candid and honest conversation about where they're at business wise. What they've seen through this year where, look, the Jets have been as active as anyone. They signed big contract extensions at the start of the season for Scheifele and Hellebuck. They're one of the teams that's been active in going to get Sean Monahan, gave up a first-round pick to Montreal in order to get that deal done. And, there was even a point in December where they were at the very top of the NHL standings. And so despite the fact they've had a lot of on-ice success, it's been an off-ice challenge still. And, Winnipeg is starting a pretty big push, I'd say, from the Jets side of things to try to remedy that. And, we didn't really get into doomsday scenarios, I would say, Julian. But I mean, it's the unspoken part of a conversation like that is that if things don't change, there's going to be ramifications that no one wants to see. And so, the Mark Chipman directly, I think the NHL is supporting him. Everyone in that organization is aligned and trying to not allow it to get to that point. But they've seen a significant drop in season tickets in the last 3 years. They saw a drop after last season, where last year's season was a year again where they were pretty good. They went to the playoffs. And so that has to change, or I don't even want to put words to what the or could be. But, this is a town also, the one thing that I found interesting that Mark said, and I don't want to spoil the article too much, but he mentioned that it's been difficult for him to find the words to have this conversation publicly, like with someone like me, a reporter, or with the fans, because he lived the loss of the team in the 90s, right? And he understands. He doesn't want to look like they're threatening anybody. He doesn't want to look like, act like they're looking for sympathy, but he also wants to be honest, right? If you're in a family, sometimes you got to sit down at the dinner table and have an honest conversation. And I think that conversation's coming with the public in Winnipeg, because they're just at a point where it's not sustainable right now with the number of tickets they're selling. And the NHL is still a gate-driven league. And that's true, not just in Winnipeg, that's around the league. The good news for the league, if you look at attendance numbers across the league, they're actually up. The NHL is doing well in a lot of markets, and in markets where they haven't always done well. I mean, I'll point at one. Florida is a market where the league has struggled attendance-wise for years and years and years. And look at the Panthers have, they got to a Stanley Cup final last year, and they're one of the better teams again this season, and the fans have responded, and they're selling tickets there. Raleigh has become like a real positive place for the league. And Mark got into some of this, and so he said it's been hard to watch his own market. It's been disheartening, I think was the word he used, because they've continued to put a good team on the ice. They're trying to push for a Stanley Cup, and they haven't been met with the enthusiasm in terms of people buying tickets. But he's also understands we've gone through a pandemic. The cost of a ticket is beyond some families. I mean, that's where it's a really delicate issue. And, I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. You'll enjoy the piece when it's published in the next day or two here at The Athletic.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that. I just feel bad for fans in Winnipeg because they waited so long for this team to get back. And now they're in this situation where there are questions around the viability of them staying in Winnipeg again. Like that must be tough to take. But you mentioned the pandemic, you mentioned ticket prices. That it? Like, what else could be the reasoning? Is it access to the arena? Like, what other factors could play into why there is an attendance issue?
Well, it's the smallest market in the league, right? So they have the least margin for error when sentiment shifts in a certain direction, or when the economy impacts the local market. It's going to impact a team like that more, just because they literally need real people to buy tickets and go to games. The other part of it too that Mark Chipman shared with me is that they have the lowest number of corporate season seats of any team in the league as well. And so, what they've done, and I'm really trying not to spoil all of it, but they've really tried to engage the business community there to change that, because, businesses, generally speaking, can withstand maybe some of the turns in the economy more than, a family of four can, where, if one member of the household loses a job, or if other expenses come along, obviously the first thing to go when you're talking about your family would be discretionary spending, like on a hockey game or a concert or something like that. Whereas a business, I think, can generally has different cash flow sort of situations and can justify that expense. And so, they're really, the way I would put it is, I didn't get the sense that in my conversation that they're blaming anybody, that there certainly was no threat or anything. Like, they're really working hard on attacking the issues and trying to address some of the concerns there. And they're doing it in really unique ways. And that's probably as far as I'll go on here. We can maybe touch on it again a little bit on Monday once the article's dropped. But, it was an honest conversation. I was very appreciative of his willingness to sit down with me and get into all this stuff, because it's not a pleasant conversation, right? Like, Mark actually said at the end of the interview, when I turned the recorder off, he said, I wasn't looking forward to this. And it's no offense to you, but it's kind of like going into somebody's house and having a discussion about struggles in their family or something. Like, it's not a pleasant thing to have to do. But I think that they don't want to pretend there's not an issue. I mean, this team has been one of the best in the league this year, and they're starting to see a little bit more of a walk-up crowd, for example. But in terms of season ticket numbers and things like that, there's really been no movement, and they need that to change starting next season, or we're not done talking about this subject, unfortunately.
Looking forward to that conversation once that piece is uploaded. Let's get to stick taps. I would like to start, if possible. I would like to give my stick tap this week to Quinton Byfield, who I think scored the goal of the year against the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I have it on a separate laptop playing on loop right now. I still can't believe that happened. He put Zach Werenski on a poster and found a way to finish an incredible play. And I think when it's all said and done, it's totally possible that Connor McDavid could just walk up and score a crazy goal of his own. We know how capable he is. But I think we're at that point where we start to look at some of the goals that have happened this year. Quinton Byfield might have it. He might have the goal of the year. It was awesome. It was amazing. It was so cool. And just a sign that, we put this label on these high draft picks. When they don't pan out right away, we think, oh man, they're going to be a bust, or oh, they're going to suck. Quinton Byfield, the number 2 overall pick from the 2020 draft class, he's starting to come into his own, man. I really like the development. I like what the LA Kings have been doing with him. You just have to take your time with some of these prospects. They're doing well by him, and they're starting to see it. They're starting to see a situation bear fruit, and I love it for him. So I'm going to give him a stick tap this week.
I'd point out, especially for the bigger players too, is Byfield's a big man, like growing into his body figure out how to exist in the game that way and be his most effective. I mean, that's what allows him to score a goal like that. Obviously, big, powerful, great vision to score that goal. And Juraj Slafkovsky in Montreal, same deal, right? I mean, he's been under the microscope, but we've really seen him come alive with his production here the last little while. And so it wouldn't look good. It was easy to come out and criticize those picks or say those players were going to pan out early in their career. But you're starting to those takes have gone pretty cold here, I'd say, as the season's gone along. As for my stick tap, I could have stick tapped either of those guys, but I'll go with Ashdeep Bains, who made his NHL debut for the Vancouver Canucks this year, the fourth player of Punjabi heritage to play in the NHL. Obviously, someone who I think, a lot of people specific in that marketplace in Vancouver, can identify with and really support, and just a cool story for him to carry some expectations and, break through barriers himself, to get to that stage in his career. It was cool to see his dad there, getting pretty emotional as he made his NHL debut. So stick taps to you, and let's hope it's the first of many NHL games for Bains.
Well said, CJ. That's going to do it for our Thursday edition of the show. We'll be back on Monday with Ask CJ and more fun stuff around the NHL. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.